I survived being snowed in, thanks to the gray wolf, Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I accidentally spent a big chunk of a winter alone, snowed in a cabin with no phone service or electricity. As the bitter winter wore on, two large Dogman predators began to circle my cabin, and I didn't think I'd still be around to see the next spring. I'm going to tell you how and why I survived that worst season of my life. But first I've got to tell you a little dog story. A big dog story, actually. My uncle passed away and left me and my parents each a big chunk of change. I knew exactly what I wanted to buy with it, which was peace and quiet. That was how in my early 20s, I became a homeowner of sorts. You see, I got my hands on a cabin in the woods just north of Hesperia, Michigan. I live in Edmore still, just as I did then. So it wasn't far away, maybe a 60 or 70 minute drive, but it really felt like I was getting away from it all. The small one-story cabin with underground basement was situated in woods that I don't think exist anymore, so it's a little hard for me to figure it. It was either on the land where Ed's Orchard Market is now, or maybe it was on the eastern side of Hesperia Pond, across from where Google tells me the River Rock Campground is currently. If that's the case, then the woods do still exist, even if the cabin might not. Or maybe it was where the campground is. I really don't remember that well. I'm telling you about the one winter I went there, and that was in early 1978. So I apologize if my memory is a bit fuzzy about some of the details. You know, looking at Google's satellite view, the area over there looks more developed than I remember it. My memories are of being out in the country. Well, I guess I was. Most of the drive out there from Edmore seems to have passed through even more natural or less developed areas, like Route 20 on either side of White Cloud, for instance. So maybe I was just in a nature mood from the drive. The cabin was situated in a clearing in a thick woods, and I guess a lot of that is still around in that part of Michigan, or someone wouldn't have opened a campground there. Still, in my memory, I was way out in the middle of nowhere. I wonder if that was so back then, or if I might have been closer to rescue than I ever knew. I don't remember Ed's Orchard Market being there then, that's for sure. That would have stuck in my memory because my own first name is also Ed. In either case, my original intention when heading out to the place was just to see it and stay overnight. Yes, the radio had been blathering on about a winter's storm, but how often are their predictions correct anyway? I assumed they were exaggerating because their supermarket sponsors wanted to stir up some panic buying. I wandered into that supermarket madness, bought myself a lot of dried goods type pantry food, and I set off for the cabin, alone. Little did I know that a truly historic winter storm, sometimes still referred to as the Cleveland Superbomb, was about to strike the entire Midwest, plus some parts of Canada, and even states south of us. I didn't believe that the freaking Cleveland Superbomb was gonna hit, so as you can tell, I do not have a single psychic bone in my entire body. I don't doubt that some people are gifted in that way, but I guess I'll just have to settle for great looks and personality. Now I saw my first cryptid of my life before I even reached the place, although I was close by when it happened. Now this was a crazy scene. I remember I was on a 2-lane highway that was passing over a river. It looked like where North Dickinson Avenue passes over the White River, and that would have been on my way there, so I think that's where this happened. Ahead of me on the road, there was a guy driving like he was drunk, which got my attention. He was driving fast, moving left and right erratically, then slowing down or even stopping before squealing off again at high speeds. I kept hoping he would speed off somewhere else, but he was slowing down more than going fast, so I kept getting closer to him no matter what I tried. At some point I could make out something that horrified me. This lunatic was driving that way because he was after this large, almost pony-sized, gray wolf. I got so angry at him, I slammed my foot on the gas pedal until I had passed that creep. Then I spun out on that 2-lane bridge, blocking both lanes and forcing that moron to come to a complete stop. The wolf ran past my 1-car blockade, then sat down on the edge of the bridge a ways further down, watching the two of us and emitting puffs of steam out into the cold air as he panted to catch his breath. I got out of my car yelling at the crazy guy, which is not something a logical person would have done. I was operating on adrenaline, and I was very young. I was a bit hot-headed, but that used to be encouraged among men when this country used to value men. The other guy got out of his car and out-shouted me. He looked to be my father's age, and his face was red with anger. He told me I was a nutcase hippie trying to save the world, and that the animal I just let free was a monster. A monster. I swear, he said monster. I looked at him in a new way, wondering if Dad over there swallowed some out-of-date medication or something. I tried to talk soothingly to the guy because I didn't want him to get violent with me, as he just had with that poor endangered gray wolf. Look, look, said the guy, pointing behind me. I thought he was trying to trick me, so I kind of backed away and turned profile. Now he was on my right, and my car and the wolf beyond it were on my left. Cautiously, slowly, tilting myself to get a peripheral view of both at once, I saw that the guy was not tricking me. He really was pointing at something that I needed to see. There, down the road, at the edge of that bridge over White River, the wolf had stood up on its hind legs. I gasped and felt like the world had just turned liquid and melted. Now I felt like the one who had taken bad meds, but I was completely sober and as sane as I've ever been. The wolf had to be over 10 feet tall. I mean, it was not a man in a costume. I wondered what the heck it was gonna do. And then it turned and just sort of walked down the road away from us. The guy was screaming at me, but I felt like I was in a dream and none of this was real. I even turned to look at the guy and study his lips as he shouted, but the words still weren't making any sense at all to me. I watched the Dogman walk off down a hill next to the road, being swallowed up by the thick forest over there in just seconds. He was gone. He was free. He hadn't even hurried his walking. He strolled to freedom. I remember the guy congratulating me. It took me a while to understand that he was being sarcastic. Congratulations, you let a monster go free. I hope he comes back and eats you while you sleep, you stupid tree-hugging hippie. That might not be an exact quote, but he shouted things like that until I got in the car and moved it off the bridge so he could pass. I wrote down his license plate because I wanted to report him for what he tried to do to that wolf. But since he had been chasing a 10-foot-tall, upright walking wolf or a canine, I wasn't really sure who would take my report seriously. Also, on a side note, I was not a hippie. I had somewhat long hair, but not for 1978. It was kind of like a Beatle haircut or something like that. I had bangs, so I was a hippie, whatever. I figured that old guy had a damaged brain or something. So what if the wolf dog creature was huge? That didn't make him a monster. Did that guy chase bears down the highway as well? I mean, yeah, that wolf was the scariest thing I'd ever seen, but live and let live, you know? Anyway, I drove out to the cabin, which, like I said, felt like it was in the middle of nowhere in those days. I unpacked all the dried and canned and jarred foods I'd brought with me into the pantry, which I discovered already had a lot of food in it, some of it seemingly recent enough to possibly eat. My mother was Italian, and I brought out a number of good kinds of dried meats to hang up around there as well. I went down into the basement, and then I discovered the generator just outside the back window. It was still working, but it was low on gas, so I turned it off almost as soon as I had gotten it going. I would need to bring gas in to refuel that before I could turn on the freezer in the basement, and then bring in frozen foods. I was also going to have to use wick lamps and my flashlight in order to stay there overnight, because the generator was my only source of electricity for the plug-in devices. So that house was off the grid, that part is undeniable. Another thing is that there was no telephone. I don't mean there was no cell service. There were no cell phones in those days, and so there were no cell towers either. There were landlines and there was radio communication. This house had no landlines, and when I fired up the shortwave radio, it didn't. Fire up, I mean. I couldn't figure out what was wrong with that for the entire time I was out there, but it was probably something simple to fix, if I knew anything about radios. If I could only have logged onto YouTube and searched for shortwave radio troubleshooting, I might have gotten it up and running and gotten out of there sooner, but there was no internet in 1978. So that isn't what happened. What did happen is that it snowed. And snowed. And snowed. And the wind started blowing in a crazy way. I got too scared to even try to open the front door. It felt like that door would have blown right off the hinges and flown away into the woods. That wind was so strong that once the storm got serious, I felt like the house was going to blow down, like the big bad wolf was outside. In fact, it turned out he actually was, in triplicate. So I didn't know this until just now, but it turns out the epicenter of that storm, January 25th and 26th in 1978, the place that got hit the worst was Muskegon. Muskegon's only about 30 miles to the southwest of where I was, okay? They got almost 34 inches of snow over 4 days. And at points, the wind blew at 110 miles an hour. That sounds about like what it felt like to me, too. Although I wasn't right at that lake's edge. I was very near a smaller lake, Hesperia Pond. And so I got hit extremely hard. The snow was already halfway my height by what my watch told me was the next morning, and I immediately began to start shoveling. I desperately wanted to keep an area in front of the front door clear enough that I could go outside. By the second or third day, I was literally digging my own grave, as the area in front of the cabin was only large enough for me to squeeze through and around to the side where there was firewood stored under a tarp by the previous owner. The pathway that I had to walk grew so tall that the snow was eventually over my head in most places by some margin. By the second day, I started counting supplies and estimating how long I could survive where I was. I had no way of calling anyone to come get me, and only the previous owner knew the location. I never had any friends or family out to that place. I thought that maybe my parents might become concerned and contact the previous owner somehow to find out where I was. I thought maybe the two could join forces to rescue me. In fact, though, they later told me they had no concern about my disappearance. I had told them I was going off into the woods in my new cabin, and since they were angry at me for spending my money on the cabin instead of investing it in my education or in stocks and bonds, the way they claimed that they would have done, they weren't going to lift a finger to help me, even if I was lost or in danger. They said it would have served me right for not following their advice. So in short, there was no cavalry on the way when I got trapped in a snowy prison. In fact, once the snowing stopped, I got the opposite of cavalry. I got some big looters coming around, looking to steal my supplies from me. Looters in the form of Dogmen. I had been working to shovel and melt away snow from in front of the windows to create sight lines, and by the third or fourth day after the snow had stopped falling, I was beginning to be able to see where the half-buried trees were, and to begin to plot my path back to my car. The thing is, I expected that to be entirely buried with snow as well, so finding it would not likely mean immediate escape, just another step in that direction. What I had not been thinking about as I methodically lowered the snow around the cabin so I could see out was that this also enabled others to see in. One bright sunny day, I caught sight of a humanoid figure somehow walking through the snow off in the distance. Racing outside shouting for help, I was surprised to find that this was not a human I was seeing. This was something more like an upright gorilla with a dog head. It was not the same gray Dogman I had saved the life of on my way to the cabin. This was a big, nasty-looking creature with black fur, tall pointed ears, and a flattened face, almost like a giant pug dog. I swear to you that when he saw me yelling and waving my arms like a fool, he did a double take, like you'd see out of an old 1920s silent comedy, and then he beat his chest, like King Kong. So that's my name for him. He's the King Kong Dogman. He made this kind of a scream or bark that was almost more like a roar, and he took off barreling forward toward me. Before I even had time to turn and run back inside, though, Kong Dogman ran off of whatever ledge he had been standing on and sunk quickly deep into the snow and out of my sight. That was another treacherous thing about that much snow in such a natural area. Unless you could remember the terrain, and I couldn't any better than that Dogman, then you could never really know if your next footstep might find solid ground under the snow, or just more snow under the snow. Inside the cabin, I searched for anything that might give me a clue as to what those dog-headed upright walking beasts might be, or if anyone had figured out how to defend against them. In among the former owner's small collection of old musty books, I found one from the early 20th century called The Door of the Unreal by Gerald Bliss. It turned out to be the story of a werewolf, but written as to be taken as fiction. Opposite the title page was a handwritten note, which read, "Remember, Bliss was dead within 3 years of this being published." And then it was signed something that looked to me like Levi Crow. The more I read the novel, the more I wondered if it might be true. Could those be werewolves outside the cabin? Or were those some kind of a wild animal? So then I met the third Dogman. The third one was orange, and it woke me up at dawn. I'll call this one Leo, as I felt he resembled a lion at the time. His fur was longer than the other two that I had seen, and it was longer still around his head. He both resembled an upright standing golden retriever and an upright standing lion. But this wasn't a cowardly lion. This was an agitated and a hungry one. The fact that it was out after sunrise and in the full light of day, still looking for food, rang an alarm bell in my head. That thing must not have eaten for a significant amount of time. I thought about getting some dried meats and trading them for my life. But once the creature saw me inside the house, it absolutely freaked out. It reached out to grab me and stuck its hand straight through a glass window, which surprised the creature as much as it terrified me. Thinking fast, I grabbed a poker and stuck it in the fireplace fire that I had been keeping going since I got there. Once that Dogman got over the surprise of learning what glass was, it was going to resume trying to get in at me. I had exactly that long to get that poker hot, and I took every last nanosecond. When Leo the Dogman next stuck his clawed paw with hand-like fingers inside, I was there to meet him with the red-hot poker. He didn't like that, and immediately retreated to stick his hand in the snow. That didn't mean I'd won, though. Leo never went away. He patrolled outside the house, occasionally looking in and watching me, like I was in the zoo, and he had paid the admission price. I was kind of wondering what he was doing out there, like what was he waiting for? And then at some point I think he wondered the same thing, because Leo lost his patience. He started barking and growling and whining like a starving puppy, and it was moving beyond intimidation to sheer terror. I thought about the cured meats. I had some mild sopressata that a beast man might like. I also had salami and bologna. Maybe if I fed that Dogman, I could keep him from eating me. I hacked off a big hunk of salami or something and headed back out of the pantry to the front door with the hot poker in my other hand. As I tried to open the door to toss the meat to the agitated orange dogman, he forced his way in, and I fell back onto the floor. The meat was on my belly, and the creature man looked down to see it. His inhuman eyes dilated fully at the sight of all that meat, and I saw my life flash through my mind, from birth memories I never knew I still retained up until that very moment. I understood every mistake I'd ever made, which resulted in this early ending to my story, and I felt a deep sense of acceptance that I had messed up. But then, that orange dogman outside got pummeled by the large gray dogman sneaking up and tackling him from his left. I watched as the two great beasts battled outside my window for what felt like hours, but might have been less than a minute. It was better than Ali Frazier, any of them. When the gray beast got the orange one away from the front door, I went out there. I left some more big hunks of different kinds of meats. I didn't give him any that were too spicy. I saved those for myself. Acquired taste. Then I went back inside and watched the fighting. I don't know if I'd still be here today if Leo had won, so it was the big gray dogman who reached that meat first. I looked on in amazement as I saw his hands holding the prepared meat. Talk about a surreal image. I mean, those were hands, but they were not human hands. As the gray dogman grabbed up the 4 hunks of meat that I had left out there, the orange one started to come to after his beating. I saw that gray dogman walk over to Leo and hold a piece of meat in front of his nose. It served to revive the orange dogman better than smelling salts might have, and soon both creatures were up on their feet. And that was when the gray dogman took that hunk of meat and threw it further and deeper into the woods than any human athlete could have thrown it. The orange dogman took off, climbing through the snow desperately in pursuit of that hunk of meat. The gray dogman settled down and began enjoying eating his other 3. So the rest of my time there was me watching my meat supply and wondering how much longer I could bribe the gray dogman not to eat me. But the strangest thing started to happen as the gray wolf and I became more familiar with each other and less afraid. We'd play little fetch games, and I felt as though we had truly become friendly. I was running out of food, though, and I didn't know how much longer this friendship might last. Then one day, seemingly in a playful manner, the gray dogman lifted me up in a way that almost gave me a heart attack. He came up behind me, inserted his head from behind between my legs, then lifted me up in the air, with the result of me sitting on his shoulders with one leg wrapped around each side of his massive neck. I felt like a toddler as the beast ran through the snow at speeds which seriously frightened me. I could see that the snow was melting, and I wondered where that beast was taking me. When he finally stopped, I recognized my car emerging as if from an iceberg from its snowy cover. I brushed the snow off it, and pulling my keychain from my pocket, I found the correct key and started trying to get the engine started. It didn't work at first, but it did eventually, and I let it sit there and run for a while to warm it up. Then I went over and said goodbye to that dogman, which was surprisingly hard to do. He was sitting like a dog sits, and I was hugging him, racking my brain to think of any way I could bring this big guy back to where I lived in Edmore. I do believe there is a reality in which I made the choice to bring him back, because I sometimes have the most incredibly realistic dreams of a giant gray bundle of fur and love sharing my home here in Edmore. It's always so surprising and disappointing to wake up and realize he doesn't actually live here. But at least I still live here. And the only reason for that is because I I survived the winter thanks to the Grey Wolf, Dogman. No matter how hard you hope and wish you won't find a better EP than Patricia. Please join us in thanking our new channel member Patricia for making this episode possible. Patricia just upgraded to the $10 level so she can see our secret uncensored archives. Over 25 hours of archived secret videos. She also gets to see our new secret uncensored episodes, which we're doing a 4 or 5 day marathon of right now. We just had a story yesterday that took place during a different historical snowstorm from this one. That one in Florida, of all places. It's called Swamp Dogman in the Snowy City, and it's a members only story. To find out how you too can become a member, here's our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Dogman. Hank. Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.